Hey everyone, Varric here. So this video is going to be on heroic Tortoise. But before we get started, I'm going to do something a little different than I've done with the other videos I've made. Normally, I don't mention either tank specific or healer specific mechanics. As being a hunter, there's usually it's not something we really need to worry about unless it's something that pertains to us specifically. However, this fight is a little different on heroic, and we need to understand a few mechanics that are related to tanking and healing. So um, I'm going to mention some stuff along that line. Also, uh, this fight does have a few variations of how you're going to approach this, and it's going to really depend on your raid makeup. And more specifically, it's going to relate whether you decide to one tank this or two tank this. Now, us specifically, we had to experiment a little bit. We one tanked this, we tried to two tank it, and then we tried a variation of the two tank strat, and then we eventually went back to the one tank. So you may have to experiment a little bit to figure out what's going to work for your raid. What I mean by that specifically for each strat being, if you decide to one tank this, we had a prot paladin, which they are very strong for this fight for a one tank. So I'm not sure if you don't have a prot paladin that one tanking may not be viable for you. Again, I'm not sure the other tanks are very strong at single tanking this fight if they're not a prot paladin. Also, if you decide to two tank this, there's a few different ways you can handle this. If you do two tank it, you can have one tank on Tortoise and then just have one tank that's in charge of picking up the bats. You can also have one tank that stays on Tortoise and just have one tank that kites the bats. I would usually recommend the first one if you're going to two tank it, as the second one with the kiting strat is a little dangerous. The way it usually works is you'll have this one tank that's on Tortoise, and then you'll either have the tank that grabs the bats after each Quake Stomp, or in this case, if we're there, we're going to misdirect the bats to the tank, but you're not actually going to kill the bats. What this basically does is, as the fight goes on, though, there's going to be probably upwards of 100 bats or so by the time the fight's over. And this is going to be totally dependent on how well your tank kites. One little mistake and it's game over, because you can't do anything if you got that many bats on you. If they get within range, your tank's going to explode. So it is a little bit riskier. However, if you have a pro kiter and he's really good about kiting stuff, you can try it. I believe usually the monk kiters or monk tanks are the strongest kiters. They seem to do very well in that role. But again, that's just going to come down to what your raids make up. Again, we end up settling on a single tank strat with a prot paladin, and that worked best for us. So just try to play around with it a little bit to figure out what works for you. Also, hunter specifically, I want to mention a few things. I highly recommend taking Crouching Tiger, Hidden Chimera, as we're going to want our deterrence on the 1 minute cooldown instead of the 2 minute cooldown. Also, we want to grab the deterrence glyph to increase the mitigation up to 50%, and this comes really important later in the fight. Also, talents, I would highly recommend taking Fervor and Barrage, just because AoE on this fight is king, and especially if you get in a good spot, you can pretty much just AoE everything down, including the turtles, the bats, and Tortoise. So it's very strong talents to take. Now, your role in this fight may differ slightly. You may be more put on priority for the turtles first, and then any spare time you have up, you'd go after the bats, and then eventually Tortoise if there's time allowed. Or you may be more focused on the bats first, and if there's time, you might help on the turtles and then go to Tortoise. Again, your role may differ from fight to fight depending on what your raid makeup is. For me, for my particular raid makeup and the fight that they'll show in this video, I was prioritized on the bats. And then, of course, if I had any extra time, I'd help on the turtles or I'd get some up on Tortoise. Now, again, all this fight plays out basically the same way. Fight will start with Tortoise. Not too far in, he'll do the Call Tortoise ability where he will summon 3 turtles. Just as on normal, it's very important. Anybody in class is strong has a strong slow that applies it. It's also very helpful if somebody marks at least 1 turtle, preferably 2, to make sure you burn at least 1 turtle down quickly for when he casts Stone Breath. Just like on normal, it becomes very important that who's ever in charge of kicking the turtles make sure they gets that out, because even one tick of stone breath is very, very painful. You definitely don't want that going off at all within possibility. And just like on normal, I believe it's about 30 seconds in, he will cast his first Quake Stomp. When this happens, you're going to be dealing with the added rock falls, and then shortly after that, your first set of vampiric bats comes down. Now, again, depending on what strat you use, regardless, you're still going to want somebody to pick up the bats. Ideally, you're going to want to misdirect regardless of whether it's to your single tank or the second tank, whichever one you decide to go with. Mainly because this fight is also very healing intensive, and when the bats come down, they are going to make a beeline for your healers. So you need to be really quick on the misdirect for these bats, otherwise your healers are probably going to get ganked really quickly. And then the fight just proceeds as normal, like it does on normal. That same pattern over and over again. Now, with all that being said and everything else being pretty much the same, the one difference on Heroic is if you look around the room, you'll see these floating crystals. These crystals are called humming crystals. And the way they work is anytime that you attack these crystals or do any damage to them, it will apply a buff to you. More specifically, it will be an absorb shield buff. Now, the first time you apply this shield to you, it will basically absorb 15% of your total health and damage. However, you can increase this up to 75% of your total health by getting healed. What I mean by that is any heals that you would normally receive, the shield will absorb and eventually cap out at 75% of your total health. And this becomes very important. The main reason that you need this shield is, other than obviously the crystals being one of the newer mechanics, Quake Stomp becomes the #1 priority that you want to keep this shield up for. Now, in normal mode, Quake Stomp will do 65% of your total health. So as long as you're not, below 65% health, you're not going to die. However, on Heroic, Quake Stomp does 100% of your total health. Meaning without this shield, you will die. So it becomes very, very important that you keep this shield up as much as possible. Now the trick becomes making sure that you keep this shield up right before Quake Stomp goes out, at least up into the 15% mark, so you don't die. Without the shield, you're not going to make it. Now, at the start of the fight, you want to shoot one of these crystals as quickly as possible, and let your healers start healing the shield up so they can get it stacked as much as they can. I believe the first Quake Stomp usually goes out within 30 seconds, so they have about that much time to get the shields capped as much as possible. Now, the first the first Quake Stomp that goes out, we can actually help a little bit with our deterrence. If you've glyphed this and it's up to 50%, you shouldn't lose your shield off the first Quake Stomp, as long as you're not standing in any of the rockfall damage. Now, again, because it's Heroic, these rockfalls do a lot of damage. So just try to stay away from as much as you can. It's going to be impossible to avoid them completely, but just try to reduce the damage as much as you can. The problem comes in later in the fight. Because even with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Chimera, the lowest you can get your deterrence on is 60 seconds. And because he's going to cast Quake Stomp every 45 seconds after the first one, you're not going to have your deterrence up for every Quake Stomp. So it's going to be basically every other one. Now the second Quake Stomp becomes more dangerous because odds are you're probably taking some type of AoE damage either from the rockfall or the turtles. So there's a possibility that it may not be capped at 75%, which means there's a good chance you're going to lose your shield on the second Quake Stomp. However, it's very important that you don't get trigger happy and immediately try to reapply the shield if you're not close to full health. The reason being is if you say are at 50% health and you grab the shield, any healing done to you is not going to heal you up. It's going to go towards the shield. Meaning by the next Quake Stomp, or if for some reason the shield should fail, you're going to be at half health before the healers have a chance to get you back up again. So it's just bad news if you grab the shield if you're too low on HP. However, there's also a reason why you don't want to grab the shield after the first one, at least, that you don't want to be at 100% health. Now, without going into too much detail, the way healing works and all this, basically the short version is you will get stronger heals if you're not at 100% health. Meaning any heals that are applied to you, as long as you're not at full, they're going to be stronger on you. And again, this ties into the shield. So let's say if you got to 90% health and grabbed the shield after it fell off the first time, any heals you start to receive are going to be higher than they would be if you grabbed that shield at 100%. And that becomes important, obviously, because after the second, the second Quake Stomp, you're going to want that shield to try to get up as quickly as possible for the next Quake Stomp or any other damage that's going out. So there is a kind of a happy medium. Usually the sweet spot is about 90% health. That way it gives it time. The heals are stronger on your shield once you have it. But if for some reason that the shield is only at around its 15% mark when the next Quake Stomp goes out, you're not going to die. You at least have the 15% damage mitigated, plus you'll be at 90% health, so you should survive. Otherwise, if you're at 50% health and the shield's only at 15%, you're going to die. So at the very minimum, I wouldn't be below 80% health grabbing a shield. Again, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the turtles and the rock falls, it may be hard to shoot right at exactly 90%, but that's what you want to try to aim for. But like I said, the fight itself still behaves the same way. The added shield mechanic becomes very important on each person. You're going to be in total control of how your shield is, as far as making sure that it's on you all the time, and making sure you're grabbing the shield at the right percentage of your HP, and helping your healers out, because they're going to have their hands full regardless. Now, as far as us that we're concerned, depending on what you're prioritizing, if you're stuck on turtle duty and you're making sure those are going down before anything else, definitely make sure that you're getting everything you can on the turtle, at least one turtle down before each stone breath. Regardless of whether you're attacking the bats or not, make sure you get a misdirect out to whichever tank, if you're two tanking or one tanking it, that it goes out immediately when the bats come out, because you don't want your healer to get ganked. If you're prioritizing the bats, just let them get to the tank. Once you've misdirected, then just go all out with your barrage and as many multi-shots as you can squeeze out. If your DPS is really good, you should be able to get the bats down well before the next Quake Stomp. And this is very important, because if you're single tanking this, you want your tank to be able to get his shield back up before the next Quake Stomp. Just like for you, you don't want to go into the next Quake Stomp with a low shield. And because he's getting beat on by Tortos, the bats, and plus the added damage from Quake Stomp, if his shield doesn't have time to charge back up, he's going to die. While this is kind of risky, I still find it less risky than the two tank with one tank kiting strat. But again, that may work out better for your raid. That's just going to depend. But overall, again, the fight's still going to work out the same way. Make sure you're kicking the turtles for stone breath. You're paying attention to your shield mechanics when it comes to Quake Stomps. Making sure that you're staying out of rockfall damage. If you get, whether you get the turtles down or you get the bats down first, try to help out with whichever one you're not prioritized on. And then once Tortos gets down in around the 25-ish% range, you're pretty much going to ignore everything else and just blow Tortos up. At this point, the turtles are going to be coming out so fast that you're not going to have time to kill them anyway. Again, anytime you kick a turtle shell at Tortos, or if you're lucky enough, and they do travel through the bats, remember, everything takes more damage when they get kicked by a shell. So if you're really on top of your game and you have the chance to try to kick the turtle shell through the bats when they're out, as that extra damage is massive. It makes them go down a lot faster, and it helps out the DPS and the tank to stay alive. But again, that's pretty much the fight. Again, it's pretty much the same thing. Really, just the shield is the only really big difference. But it's very, very important that you keep up on that shield, and you're paying attention to when you get it to make sure you're not getting it too low on HP. I think that's everything, but if I missed something, just feel free to leave it down in the comments down below, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. hopefully the video was helpful. But as always, I appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you later.